The evening air hung heavy over downtown Atlanta as Dr. Marcus Thompson's BMW rolled through the quiet streets. His dark brown eyes fought exhaustion after a grueling 16-hour shift at Atlanta General. Today had been particularly challenging, 3 back-to-back cardiac surgeries, including saving a 7-year-old girl with a congenital heart defect. His surgical scrubs were still in his back seat, a reminder of the lives he'd touched today. The clock on his dashboard read 11:42 p.m. Marcus smiled, thinking about finally getting home to his warm bed. He'd earned this rest. The streets were mostly empty, with only the occasional passing car and the rhythmic hum of his engine breaking the silence. Red and blue lights suddenly exploded in his rearview mirror. Marcus checked his speedometer, 34 in a 35 zone. His turn signals were working, and his registration was up to date. With 15 years of driving experience and not so much as a parking ticket, he knew he'd done nothing wrong. Still, he did what his father had taught him. Turn on the interior lights, keep your hands visible on the steering wheel, and stay calm. As he pulled over, Marcus noticed a young Hispanic nurse named Sarah Martinez leaving her shift at the nearby urgent care clinic. She slowed her pace, her attention drawn to the scene unfolding before her. The police cruiser's door opened with a heavy creak. Officer James Barrett emerged, his hand resting unnecessarily on his holster. Even from the side mirror, Marcus could see the officer's face twisted in what could only be described as contempt. Barrett's boots crunched against the asphalt, each step deliberate and threatening. License and registration, Barrett barked, his flashlight beam intentionally aimed to blind Marcus. Despite the bright light in his eyes, Marcus maintained his professional composure. "Good evening, officer. My license is in my wallet, and my registration is in the glove compartment. Would you like me to retrieve them?" Barrett's response came sharp and cold. "What's a guy like you doing in a car like this at this hour? This is a nice neighborhood." Marcus felt the familiar sting of those words. A guy like you? He'd heard them before, but it never hurt less. Still, he kept his voice steady. "I'm just heading home from my shift at Atlanta General. I'm a cardiac surgeon there." Barrett scoffed audibly. "Right? And I'm the president. Let me see that license, boy." With slow, deliberate movements, Marcus retrieved his wallet. Sarah Martinez, still watching from across the street, pulled out her phone and began recording. Something about Officer Barrett's demeanor set off alarm bells in her mind. "Dr. Marcus Thompson," Barrett read aloud, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You expect me to believe that? This car's probably stolen. Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, with all due respect, I've done nothing wrong. I'm simply trying to get home after saving lives all day. You can call the hospital to verify my identity." Barrett's face reddened. "Listen here, boy. When I tell you to step out, you step out. Unless you want this to get complicated." Marcus's heart raced, but his surgeon's training kept his hands steady. He'd taken an oath to save lives, regardless of who they belonged to. Even now, facing such blatant discrimination, he maintained his dignity. "Yes, officer." Marcus stepped out slowly, his white coat from the hospital still draped over his arm, a stark reminder of the lives he'd saved just hours before. Barrett circled him like a predator, shining his flashlight over Marcus's expensive watch, his hospital ID badge, and his professional attire. "Pop the trunk." "May I ask why, officer?" "Because I said so. Or would you prefer to do this down at the station?" As Marcus moved to comply, Sarah Martinez's presence caught Barrett's attention. "Move along, miss. Nothing to see here." But Sarah stood her ground, her phone still recording. She'd witnessed enough injustice in her years as an ER nurse to know when something wasn't right. Barrett spent the next 15 minutes searching Marcus's car, throwing his medical equipment around carelessly and questioning every piece of documentation he found. The officer's frustration grew with each legitimate piece of identification and hospital documentation he discovered. Finally, running out of excuses to prolong the harassment, Barrett pulled out his ticket book. "I'm citing you for a broken taillight." "My taillight isn't broken, officer," Marcus replied calmly. "It is now." Barrett's nightstick tapped against the rear of the BMW, and the sound of breaking plastic echoed through the street. Sarah gasped audibly from her position across the road. As Barrett scribbled the ticket, His smugness was palpable. "Here's your citation, doctor. Next time, stick to your own neighborhood. We don't need your kind around here." Marcus accepted the ticket with the same steady hands that had performed life-saving surgery just hours before. He watched in the rearview mirror as Barrett returned to his cruiser, a satisfied smirk plastered across his face. Sarah Martinez approached as Barrett pulled away. "Dr. Thompson? I recorded everything. We should report him." Marcus sighed, looking at the ticket in his hands. "Thank you, but we both know how these things usually go. I just want to get home." Little did either of them know that karma had something else in store, and Officer James Barrett's night was about to take an unexpected turn that would change multiple lives forever. As Marcus started his engine, the universe was already setting in motion a chain of events that would transform this night of injustice into something none of them could have anticipated. The hands that Officer Barrett had just humiliated would soon be the only thing standing between him and death itself. Sarah watched Marcus drive away, still recording, unaware that in less than 15 minutes, she would witness something that would shake her belief in coincidence forever. The night was far from over, and justice sometimes arrives in the most unexpected packages. The fluorescent lights of the Shell gas station cast a harsh glow over Officer James Barrett's face as he strutted inside, still riding the power high from his recent encounter. The clock on the wall read 12:03 a.m. The satisfaction of putting another troublemaker in his place made him crave his usual post-shift snack, a chocolate bar and black coffee. Sarah Martinez had also stopped at the same gas station, her hands still shaking with anger from witnessing the earlier incident. She stood in the candy aisle, her phone now tucked away but the video evidence safely stored. As she watched Barrett from the corner of her eye, her nursing instincts suddenly kicked in. Something wasn't right with his movements. Barrett reached for his coffee, but his left arm suddenly went slack. The styrofoam cup crashed to the floor, black liquid spreading across the white tiles like an oil spill. The officer's face contorted in confusion, then pain. His right hand clutched at his chest, fingers desperately grasping at his uniform. "I can't." Barrett's words came out as a gasp. His face had turned an alarming shade of gray. Sarah's professional training overrode any personal feelings about the man. She rushed forward as Barrett's knees buckled. His large frame hit the ground with a heavy thud, sending a display of energy drinks clattering across the floor. "Sir, can you hear me?" Sarah knelt beside him, her fingers immediately finding his carotid pulse, rapid and irregular. His skin was cold and clammy to the touch. Classic heart attack symptoms. The teenage cashier, Tommy, stood frozen behind the counter. Should I call someone? Call 911. Now." Sarah barked, her ER nurse voice cutting through the boy's panic. She quickly unbuttoned Barrett's shirt, noting the way his chest rose and fell in desperate, shallow breaths. Barrett's eyes were wide with fear, a stark contrast to the arrogant confidence he'd displayed just minutes ago. "Please," he wheezed, "my daughter, she's only 12. "Save your breath," Sarah instructed, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the irony of helping the man she'd just watched abuse his authority. She began chest compressions, knowing that every second counted. The gas station door chimed as more customers entered, creating an audience to the unfolding drama. Someone recognized Barrett from the local force and called the police station directly. Within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Barrett's condition deteriorated rapidly. His pulse became more erratic and his lips started turning blue. Sarah recognized the signs. This wasn't just any heart attack. This was a major cardiac event. The ambulance was still at least 8 minutes out, according to Tommy's 911 call. "He's going into cardiac arrest," Sarah announced to the growing crowd. "Does anyone here have medical training?" The night seemed to hold its breath. Barrett's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Sarah continued compressions, her arms already burning from the effort. She knew that without immediate intervention, Officer Barrett's chances of survival were dropping by the second. Deputy Chief Michael Anderson burst through the door, his face pale at the sight of his officer down. "What happened?" "Massive cardiac event," Sarah explained between compressions. "We need advanced cardiac life support now. The ambulance won't make it in time." Anderson grabbed his radio, desperately calling for any nearby medical personnel. As if answering a prayer, a familiar BMW screeched to a halt in the parking lot. Dr. Marcus Thompson had heard the emergency call over his police scanner, a habit he'd developed during his residency years to stay informed about incoming traumas. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. The same hands that Barrett had treated with such contempt less than 30 minutes ago were now racing toward him, carrying a portable medical kit that Marcus always kept in his car. Sarah looked up as Marcus burst through the door, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared disbelief. The irony was palpable, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had a life to save, even if it belonged to someone who had just shown them the worst of humanity. Barrett's life now quite literally rested in the hands of the man he had racially profiled and humiliated. The gas station had become an impromptu emergency room, with Sarah and Marcus working together to combat death's approaching shadow. The next few minutes would determine not just Barrett's fate, but perhaps something much larger about human nature itself. The security cameras silently recorded everything, documenting a moment that would soon become a powerful lesson about prejudice, redemption, and the true measure of a person's character. As Marcus knelt beside his tormentor, his actions would prove that some people's hearts are big enough to rise above hatred, even in the face of those who had shown them none of the same compassion. Deputy Chief Anderson watched in stunned silence as the drama unfolded, already knowing that this night would change his department forever. The next few minutes would either witness a miracle or a tragedy, but either way, nothing would ever be the same. Time seemed to freeze in that fluorescent-lit gas station as Dr. Marcus Thompson worked with the precision that had saved countless lives before. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, no trace of hesitation or vindictiveness despite the recent history between him and his patient. "He's in V-fib," Marcus announced, his voice steady as he studied the portable ECG he'd retrieved from his car. "Sarah, continue compressions. I'm going to have to shock him." The small crowd watched in awe as Marcus pulled out his portable defibrillator, a piece of equipment that had raised Officer Barrett's suspicions during the traffic stop just minutes ago. The same device he had mockingly suggested was probably stolen was now charging up to save his life. "Clear." Marcus's voice rang out. Barrett's body jerked as the electrical current surged through him. The ECG continued its ominous monotone. "Still in V-fib. Charging again." Deputy Chief Anderson stood transfixed, his hand gripping his radio so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The security cameras captured every second as Marcus administered epinephrine and prepared for another shock. "Clear." This time, the ECG's rhythm changed. A weak but steady heartbeat emerged. "We've got him back," Marcus announced, his forehead beaded with sweat. "But he needs a hospital now." As if on cue, paramedics burst through the door. They found a scene that defied explanation, a black surgeon and Hispanic nurse working in perfect sync to save a white officer who had racially profiled them both. As the paramedics prepared Barrett for transport, his eyes flickered open. Recognition dawned on his face as he saw Marcus adjusting his fore. Barrett whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why?" Marcus leaned closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Because, Officer Barrett, that's who I am. That's who we are. Your life matters too." Tears welled up in Barrett's eyes as the weight of his actions crashed over him. The paramedics wheeled him out, but his gaze remained locked on Marcus until the doors closed. The following days brought a whirlwind of changes. Sarah's video of the traffic stop went viral, juxtaposed with the gas station's security footage of the rescue. The story exploded across national news networks. Racist officers saved by doctor he profiled. A week later, Officer Barrett requested a meeting with Marcus at the hospital where he was recovering. Deputy Chief Anderson insisted on being present, along with Sarah Martinez. "Dr. Thompson," Barrett began, his voice thick with emotion, "I've spent every minute since that night thinking about who I've been and what I've done. My daughter asked me why the doctor I was mean to saved my life. I had no answer for her." Marcus sat quietly, letting Barrett continue. "I've requested a transfer to community relations," Barrett announced. "And I want to start a department-wide program addressing racial bias. But first, I need to formally apologize to both you and Nurse Martinez. "What I did was inexcusable." Deputy Chief Anderson stepped forward. "We're launching a full investigation into past complaints, and we're implementing new training protocols. Dr. Thompson, we'd be honored if you'd consider being part of our reform committee." Marcus looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Real change requires more than just words," Marcus said. "It requires action, education, and open hearts." 3 months later, Marcus stood before the entire police department, delivering a keynote speech about unconscious bias and human dignity. Officer Barrett sat in the front row, now a vocal advocate for police reform and racial sensitivity. The local news ran a follow-up story. Barrett had started a mentorship program connecting officers with diverse medical professionals, creating bridges between law enforcement and the community. The program was named the Second Chance Initiative. Sarah Martinez became a regular speaker at police training sessions, sharing her perspective as both a healthcare worker and a witness to both injustice and redemption. As for Marcus, he kept the citation for the broken taillight framed in his office, not as a reminder of injustice, but as proof that change is possible, that hearts can transform, and that sometimes the greatest victories come from choosing compassion over vengeance. 1 year later, Barrett's daughter graduated middle school. In the audience sat an unlikely group of supporters. Her father in his community relations uniform, Dr. Marcus Thompson, Nurse Sarah Martinez, and Deputy Chief Anderson, living proof that the human heart, when given a second chance, can grow beyond its prejudices. The story of that night became more than just a viral video or a news headline. It became a testament to the power of human dignity, a reminder that heroism sometimes means rising above hurt to help others, and proof that even in our darkest moments, light can break through, one changed heart at a time. As Marcus often said in his subsequent speeches, sometimes it takes a heart stopping to make a heart start changing. The night that began with hatred ended up transforming not just one officer, but an entire department, proving that the most powerful response to prejudice isn't revenge, it's rising above it to demonstrate the very humanity that others fail to see.